Hi there, everybody. This is Dr. Zeus coming at you with week 6 of our introduction to emotions and motivation. Today we have a really, and this week we have a really interesting aspect to go over. Again, as before, I'm going to try to get you to actually experiment with these things and not just write words or academic treatises. We want to actually apply this research. One of the big purposes of this class is application. And it's also something you'll take with you into your professional and personal lives. So that's my focus, and we should get right to it. Here's my outline for this week. Again, use this as a study guide. If you're in my class, you can go ahead and just turn these in Blackboard Learn according to the instructions for week 6. If you just happen to be stumbling across this, it's a great little way to experiment. So let's go through. This is week 6. What's the driving question? The driving question is this: what are moral emotions, and how do they connect us to or disconnect us from ourselves and others? Again, we're trying to get into this notion of affirmative, proactive, conscious understanding of our emotions and how they affect relationships, how they affect our ability to be compassionate, how they can enhance or detract from our ability to be critically analytical about what's going on around us, and also to be creative in the ways that we engage our lives and our relationships. So that's helped by us being capable, that is, understanding some of the content and research around emotion, but it really, really gets down to it when we apply it. So that's what we're going to be doing again this week. So you're going to view this video. I'm going to ask you also to do the Ask Dr. Zeus week 6 video, which had a lot of your amazing and brilliant insights. I'm just blown away by how emotionally intelligent this class is, and especially given the opportunity to apply some of these insights. I'm still just amazed by that. Access and download the week 6 folder academic readings, especially the the first one and the second one. View the videos in the week 6 folder on Blackboard Learn, and then start forming groups of 4 to 6 for a group presentation around particular issues or emotions. And also, if you want a bonus, the Rosie Project Book Club. Again, that's a book about a guy with autism meeting a really artsy person, and the kind of comedy of manners and their emotional frameworks coming together. So it's a great fictional and yet very useful applied aspect. So here we go. What's the work? On the discussion board, here's what I want you to do. Basically, the question is, how can you use emotional behaviorism? Now, here's what happened. Before I asked you to actually do a surprising action, to do something good for someone, a loved one, of a pleasant nature, and these were very successful. They changed dynamics, they got people interested in acting on. Then I did the next week, try to flip your thinking when you're judging someone from a negative thought pattern to a positive one. It wasn't as successful. So I'm thinking, well, let's use the fact that it seems like actions are working better than thinking to change emotional patterns. So let's go on with that notion. And so we're going to apply it to what we've already done last week. Remember, you had an emotional pattern or pet peeve or lasting traumatic situation that you identified last week or the week before? Well, here's what we're going to do with that. Instead of reversing your thinking on it to try to develop different feelings, try changing your actions. Thinking differently, like I said, did not work so well for the class, and changing the emotional pattern as well as acting differently did. So, and then finally, then observe and share the effects on the discussion board of your new actions on you and others. What were your emotional responses? If you're awkward or embarrassed, some of these will probably naturally have that happen. Go ahead and share that. What were the emotional responses of others? Because now you're not acting your role, right? You're acting kind of contrary to other people's expectation or the conventional wisdom. So, you know, their reactions may be suspicion, surprise, who knows what. Okay, so here's some examples. I think I mentioned them or touched on them a little bit last week, but here you go. If you're a perfectionist, a lot of you are perfectionists, literally, here's a way to just reverse it with action. Literally and intentionally misspell several words in an assignment and use run-on sentences You can correct them later. Just actually do it once, okay? At least. Just to observe your emotional response. Like, what happens when you actually do it on purpose, okay? Or here's another alternative. Simply decide to do a good enough job and relax rather than striving for perfection and getting yourself stressed out, okay? So it might be interesting. Again, I'm not going to be so perfectionist in my looking at this. I'm really looking toward your analysis and reflection about your own emotional responses. If your pet peeves is friends on cell phones, as one of them was for one of you, when you go out, get them all to agree to put away cell phones for the night as an experiment. Or alternately, if they're really nervous, mom's like, okay, we're going to check it on the hour. Okay, nothing, no problem. All right, for the next hour, we're putting these away, we're turning them off, whatever. Okay, so, and the buzzers too, because that will always distract. And maybe allow one selfie at the end of the night, but we're not going to take pictures of food. We're not going to be engaged on our screen here. We're actually going to be engaged with one another. That's going to be the rule. This is the experiment. If you had a traumatic experience and you desire to sing in public, as one of you did, literally make it a point, make it your assignment to go karaoke or join the church or community choir. And again, this is a bold step, but why not? Challenging these emotional patterns usually have a very thin premise from the background, and you do it with action and then just see. You don't even have to be a good singer. You're going to see what's going to happen as a result of this. So do it. Go out and karaoke, sing in public, and see how you feel. You're not meant to be successful or fail. You don't have to worry about any of that. What you're doing is looking at your emotional reactions and the emotional reactions of others to see if they've changed. And here you go. Another person said, we get our signals crossed. Sometimes I want to go out. He wants to go out just with us. And sometimes I want to go out with my mom, and we communicate it. We get the signals crossed. She suggested using some kind of hand gesture or something to do that. Try it. See if that can go ahead and disrupt that emotional pattern and create some kind of solution. And here's the last one. Or simply have fun identifying an unwritten social or emotional rule in your home, group of friends, etc., and break it. One of the examples I have in school is, everyone's supposed to dress according to their stereotype. Like a nerd's supposed to dress like a nerd, or a jock's supposed to dress like a jock. Dress differently, dress in a very sharp suit, or dress in a completely like a punky way if you're a nerd. Just doing something that simple and then observing the reactions of other people really help you understand how emotional patterns influence relationships and possibility. So again, have fun with this. Just really, really enjoy it. Like I said, try not to, if you can, try not to let people know you're doing it for class. If you're so awkward at the end that you want to repair relationships or something, you can say it at the end, but let the spontaneous emotions arise in yourself and others first. So the second one is the question of the week assignment. What would happen in a conflict situation if you proactively used empathy rather than reacting from your emotional patterns? Again, what we're trying to do is go from unconscious to conscious here, and we're trying to be proactive rather than reactive, especially in situations that might imply some kind of threat. Now, that threat can be very symbolic. It can go back into some childhood pattern, but we're still going to go ahead and address that. First here, the first part is identify an area of persistent conflict between you and a loved one. Describe the area of conflict, how it developed, and why it persists. Now, I'll just use an example here. Let's say you have a woman and a man, and this is a fairly common situation. She has abandonment issues. So when he's at a party, he really likes to zone in on someone. So he's zoning in on a fairly attractive woman, and she's feeling nervous. She's not feeling like he's going to go home with her or anything, but it's really triggering that notion of abandonment from her childhood. And she feels like it's reluctant to say anything because she feels like it's not a warranted feeling necessarily, and she doesn't want to communicate that she's jealous or she's imposing on this on her spouse or her partner. But it's still an issue. It's creating nervousness there. It's creating discomfort. So if that's the issue, going to number 2, either proactively before it happens again or in the middle of another episode of this conflict, call it timeout. In this case, let's say they're talking in bed and she brings up the issue. Now the guy, let's pretend I'm the guy. I could say, listen, what's your problem? You don't think that I'm actually going to go out with that person, do you? And she's like, well, no. And see, now she's been shut down. My response was defensive. And it was obviously not empathetic. An empathetic response would say, tell me a little bit more about that. How are you feeling, right? This is this is where you open with empathy. Say explicitly, I'm going to listen to you and gain your perspective. What was your frustration here? How were you feeling? Instead of defensive and reactive, you're being sensitive and proactive and really wanting to get in to the inside of what that other person is feeling, because you do want to have feelings or a healthier relationship, a more open, communicative relationship with that person. Where's this coming from? What are your feelings around the issue? I'm going to take the time to understand where you're coming from and empathize with your situation. And you allow that person to be just them. In this particular case, yeah, maybe abandonment comes up. The person emphasizes some nervousness about just zoning in on maybe a particularly attractive woman in the case of this example. You could say, okay, and maybe it comes up that it does reflect some kind of abandonment, or some feeling comes up that this is signaling that you're leaving or going to be bailing on the relationship. Even if it's not completely reasonable, it doesn't matter. It's still there, and an empathetic person acknowledges that feeling, acknowledges it's part of the experience of that person's past, and says, oh, I'm glad you shared that with me, okay? And then here's the last part, and it can be quite simple, and I'll use my own example to emphasize how simple it can be. Try to empathize from a self-focused and other-focused orientation. So I'm hearing and kind of trying to feel what they're kind of feeling. I go into my own background when I was left or abandoned or felt left alone, so I can develop an emotional involvement or connection with what that person is experiencing. And the other one is being other focused as well. And that is, instead of being reactive, I'm listening, asking questions, helping to tease that out, which helps that person understand emotions they may have never really talked about inside their own mind. So it does both things. It allows an empathetic connection, but it also allows the situation to come out more vividly. And I said, remember, this is not about your feelings at the moment. That's the person trying to connect. It's about linking with the feelings of the other, okay? And then finally, this is number 5, debrief. Summarize that person's feelings, validate them, and share with them what you have learned from what they have said. Share your own feelings in ways that work with the feelings of the other. So for me, and let's say I'm the guy in this particular case, I said, listen, I do love you. I'm very committed to you. I understand where you're coming from. And you know me, I tend to get very focused in on a person. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm focusing on them to the exclusion of you. But here was a very simple thing that could help the situation, and that is maybe just having the presence of mind to reach out, give a little bit of touch or reassurance, or turn away from that person every once in a while, and just give some kind of show of intimacy or affection can take care of the situation. Because it says, I'm not just zoning in on this person, I'm including you, and in a public way, but also in a personal way, with very concrete signs that you're still in my heart, that's still in my awareness. So something that simple, which is just reaching over and touching someone, sometimes you don't even have to look toward them or to them, could be, if you want to say, the solution in the debriefing of this. And a solution, when I say solution, it's not going to solve all problems, not going to just make abandonment issues disappear. What it's going to do is start to work forward in a proactive way that develops intimacy and trust through empathy that can create a stronger relationship. And that in ways that are addressed in concrete ways, not just with words and not just with beliefs, but actual actions. So a lot of these issues, like I saw with a lot of your sharing, arise out of insecurity associated with past experience. By validating the other person to be honest and transparent and providing a supportive presence, often some obscured feeling can be turned up to help solve the problem. It's just invisible. That person is not even thinking about it, or they're afraid to bring it forward. Once they feel free to bring it forward, all of a sudden things can change significantly. So there we have kind of the 2 things I'm going to have you do this week. Now we're going to go over the readings. I'm going to pause it for a second, and we'll go over the readings. Okay, now the readings. Again, here is a wonderful opening passage. This is from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. It is my favorite, maybe my favorite philosophical passage of all time. It's completely appropriate to this week. It's called the Genius of the Heart passage. It's passage 295 in the Beyond Good and Evil book by Nietzsche. I'll simply read it. The genius of the heart who silences all that is loud and self-satisfied, teaching it to listen, who smooths rough souls and lets them taste a new desire, to lie still as a mirror and the deep sky, so that the deep sky may mirror itself in them. The genius of the heart who teaches the doltish and rash hand to hesitate and reach out more delicately, who guesses the concealed and forgotten treasure, the drop of graciousness and sweet spirituality under dim and thick ice, and is a divining rod for every grain of gold that has long laid buried. In the dungeon of much mud and sand, the genius of the heart, from whose touch everyone walks away richer, newer to themselves than before, broken open, blown at and sounded out by a thawing wind, perhaps more unsure, tenderer, more fragile, more broken, but full of hopes that as yet have no name. Beautiful. Empathy, moral emotion, opening up. Really boils down to this, and I've written it right here. It's about emotional development. Emotions that break us open, positive, pro-social, proactive, and chosen, and emotions that close us off, which tend to be negative, antisocial, reactive, and reflexive, meaning I don't really think about them. Emotion and emotional development really requires a conscious accessing of what's going on inside of us and conscious decisions to open, to forgive, to connect, and so forth. So again, that's where my question came from. What are the moral emotions and how do they connect or disconnect us from ourselves and others? What is the role of personal boundaries and emotional protection? Because we can do this thing like codependence where we give ourselves too much. We emphasize and we become absorbed into another person. So I'm not encouraging that. If you notice, the exercise I did was quite balanced, quite proactive, quite balanced. You didn't lose yourself in the other person. You were simply allowing yourself to enter their situation. Is there such a thing as unhealthy empathy, codependence? And there's also this gender difference. You might notice, but guys like Dr. Phil tend to focus on tasks and principles. How's that working for you? Women tend to focus more on awareness and relationship. And male scholarship around emotions and psychology has been dominated almost exclusively by males. So it's not unusual that a lot of this research really gears toward just the mental, the task-oriented, the observational, and the quantitative. The more qualitative, the more compassionate, relationship-oriented stuff is only happening recently because women are becoming more involved in research around emotions. I think that's a great direction. I think it's a much more profitable direction. So anyway, the first thing I wanted to say, this is chapter 5 in Ekman's book, that there is a connection between sadness with anger. And a lot of you brought that up in your examples. Sometimes sadness would create anger because sadness creates vulnerability and the anger is a way to keep people away in that vulnerable state. In this case, that wasn't what it was about. This is a picture on the second page of a person who learned that her son had been died or murdered. Again, getting at this notion of agony as well as sadness, this notion of just not wanting to accept it, but this overwhelming grief. I didn't get a lot from this. I will just very briefly go over some of the points that I did get from it. Again, Ekman has a very cognitive notion and a very physiological notion. He's looking at the actual facial expressions, reading them, mimicking them, and linking that up with the actual experience of emotion. But he does have some analysis I find helpful. That one was that anger can be a defense against agony, a substitute, and sometimes even the cure. Well, maybe not so much the cure, but we get the idea. When the rejected lover can become angry at being jilted, the despair subsides, sometimes. In a moment of intense loneliness, the sadness will return and may again be driven away by anger. So we see that anger is oftentimes, and you show this in a lot of your stories, a defense mechanism against sadness. I want to encourage you to actually, though, inhabit that sadness and see it as a way of breaking you open as having a productive, not weak, not failed, but actually a productive thing that's blowing you open like that genius of the heart passage so that you can be more empathetic with yourself and with others. It's a very key skill. And instead, especially in individualistic American culture, we see that we tend to see that only as a weakness when it's actually quite a great strength. So let's go ahead and move on here. I don't want to spend a lot of time with all of this. Here's what agony and sadness are saying, basically. Here it is. I am suffering, comfort, and help me. That's sort of the signal that you're sending. Like anger is saying, get the heck away from me. Sadness is kind of saying the opposite. I'm suffering, please be with me. It's interesting that we allow oftentimes our body language to say that for us, and it's difficult for us to actually ask for a hug or ask to be comforted. That's another thing I think we all could stand to do some work with, is actually using our voices proactively to ask for what we need. And that oftentimes doesn't happen. So what else do we have here? Oh, they talked about the difference between depression and mere sadness. Depression tends to last quite a bit longer instead of dissipating quickly. Oftentimes there is a notion in depression that things will not get better. In fact, they're getting worse. Okay? And in addition to sadness and agony, guilt and shame are strongly felt. So there's all these other emotions that come in. So again, it oftentimes has its own self-reinforcing thing, especially clinical depression. So those are some of the differences between depression and sadness. He actually has you looking at the picture, trying to identify with her, actually mimicking the facial things of sadness in order to actually reproduce it and stimulate it in your body. You can actually do this. I encourage you to do this experiment. I'm not sure how useful it is. Again, it's not necessarily going to help you change it, but at least it'll help you understand it a little bit and understand the link between the physiology, that's a facial expression, and your body's responses. Okay, what did I put here? Oh yeah, I would just put this is oftentimes, again, around academic observation. Observation is fine, but I think what we want to do more often is to intervene. So what are the moral emotions? Again, one of your readings is Jonathan Haidt, okay? And he goes through kind of a history of it. Again, a lot of what was happening here is that in the early times, discussion about emotions is dominated by males, especially male philosophers who saw reason as above passions. This kind of got thrown backwards, where passions now recently in research is getting a lot more positive attention. But here, look at this. In this thing, disgust, shame, and anger have had this 860% increase, 400% increase, and 300% increase in the research and attention that's been given to it. I think this has to do with all the partisanship that's going through this transitional time. Conservative versus liberal, traditional versus modern, and so forth. I don't particularly, again, it's easy to measure and there's a lot around it right now, but it's not really that helpful. A lot of times you're entraining the negative emotions, those more antisocial emotions, right? Disgust, shame, and anger over empathy or sympathy. Look at that, 55%. I have a problem with this. We need to sort of flip that around because it may help us describe emotions that are out there, but it's not actually going to help us solve them. Solving those emotions or moving through them is going to be dependent upon these more active, proactive, more pro-social tendencies. So I'm keep going on, and again, it says high pro-sociability and disinterestedness, anger, and guilt. I don't understand why that's up in there. I'm baffled sometimes at how some of these people come up with their graphs. He did explain it, and I still didn't get it. He just lists other condemning emotions: contempt, anger, disgust, and I threw in blame there. Again, those are the ones I think we want to understand but also avoid. Okay, contempt doesn't develop good habits. Saying someone's beneath you. Anger can be a mixed bag. You could have righteous anger at injustice. That can be productive, but still that's a pro-social. You're connecting, emphasizing. That's why you're angry. Or you could be angry at someone because you're slapping them down. That would be antisocial. Okay. Disgust is rarely a helpful emotion when it comes to connecting with other people. It puts them down and underneath you. Again. So again, looking at these, I think we really need to be careful and discerning about which emotions we tend to exhibit. It's good to be honest, but at the same time, it's also good to be productive. So Like I told you, contempt being one of those other condemning emotions where there's judgment and condemnation placing someone below you. Okay. Let's see here if there's anything else. I think we're going to just zoom ahead to the part on empathy, because now there are other praising emotions, including empathy. And so here's the part that I was underscoring for your assignment. It's helpful. And you can refer to someplace in this passage. It's used in perceptual translation. Okay, it's called empathy. It's a translation of the German word Einfühlung. Has been used in perceptual context to refer to the process of seeing an event from the inside. Empathy researchers continue this emphasis on general perspective taking, defining empathy as an emotional response that stems from another's emotional state or condition and is congruent with the other's emotional state or condition. So it is literally a person having an emotional state, you're responding to it and you're getting in sync with them. Okay, that's what empathy is, feeling what they're feeling. So there's kind of a definition of empathy there. Here are some other pro-social or elevating understands. Gratitude, awe, and elevation. Again, these are the higher emotions. These are the ones picking us and other people up. Hardly any research done on these. Hard to measure. Doesn't reflect a lot of all the, drama that's going out there right now, but critical to helping develop happier, healthier lives. Love is another one, especially unconditional love. And again, reason versus emotion, who's in charge? I think by now we have come to the conclusion that the two of them, thinking and feeling, have to reference one another. If you have judgmental negative thoughts, it's usually going to create negative feelings. You have negative feelings, it's usually going to flow into negative thoughts. You're going to justify or rationalize a prejudice because you have a prejudiced feeling. So there's not one over the other. They work hand in hand and they're fairly equal. They reinforce each other. So that's a conclusion we can get from that. Martin Hoffman's empathy and pro-social behavior is key for doing the work. Again, here's the summary. Research highlights the role of cognition in arousing empathy, developing it and shaping it into related emotions, sympathy, empathic anger, and feeling of injustice and guilt. It briefly summarizes gender difference and the roles of socialization and points out empathy's limitations. Finally, new directions are suggested. That is what this article is about. Okay? Here's the interesting thing. They're trying a metacognitive approach. That is feeling about what you're feeling and thinking about what you're thinking, realizing you're having a feeling. Okay? That's metacognitive. And by the way, this is page 456 in your PDF reader. She copied the whole thing. So you'd have to go up to 440 within the article, but also if you're just looking at your PDF reader, you can type in 456 and it'll bring it right up to here. Okay? Again, there are degrees of empathy, right? The more intense the victim's actual distress is, the quicker they are to help. That is, a person is quicker they are to empathize and help, at least to a certain point. If it gets too much, a lot of times that person just shuts down and paralyzes. There's different kinds of empathic arousal, mimicking the person's behavior, conditioning, like the baby's cry, creating this response in the mother, direct association. You can read all about this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, and it's not personally related. But here is the part that I really do want you to focus on. Perspective taking, okay? This really has to do with the question of the week. So read through this, please. Imagining oneself in another's place converts the other situation into mental images that evoke the same feeling in oneself. By the imagination, we place ourselves in the other situation. We conceive ourselves enduring all the same torments. We enter, as it were, into his body or her body and become, to some measure, the same person. Now, this has two. It has kinds. There's self-focused, right? Other-focused. I already focused on that in the question. And then there's a combination of the two. Okay? So go ahead and read through this page in particular, okay, in helping to answer that question. And this is page 442 in the article, okay? And again, this is important, right? Emotional intensity, sustained attention, these are all things that begin to affect your ability to really inhabit that other person's situation. Some of this can help you. I mean, we haven't done a lot about codependence, but it is possible to over-empathize in such a way that you allow yourself to be absorbed in that person. A lot of times that's called codependency or codependence. in which that person can be using you or abusing you, and you're still trying to, in some sense, make sense of them by inhabiting their framework. That can be quite unhealthy. They don't mention it that much, but I am going to mention it. And here's what I'm saying. Here's another good paper: personal, interpersonal, and social actions and feelings. Okay, right? So being treated unfairly and unjustly, getting less than they deserve, if you're seeing other people deprived of their rights, creating an empathic distress. So my dog's trying to get up here. Okay. And again, here's another thing I wanted to show you in terms of sociocultural variables. Girls are socialized more than boys to be kind and feel responsible for others' well-being. Girls are thus expected increasingly with age to be more empathic and pro-social and less likely to harm others. You're going to see that as a sociocultural variable of gender influencing your emotional intelligences and your interactions. And I want you to be able to pick up on those things. I mentioned a couple more last week. Ethnicity could be another one. Religion can be another one, especially when it comes to these moral emotions. So, go ahead and think in terms of those kinds of ways of doing things. So there isn't much here. I guess I wanted to show just one little chart here. This is the third. This is the third article, the one by Horberg, Orweis, and Keltner. Pay attention to this little chart right here. Linkages between emotions and socio-moral concerns. It does a pretty good job of explaining the socio-moral concern with the emotion. Again, notice which emotions are authoritarian, rule-based, hard, tough love emotions. You look at a disgust, anger, contempt, right? Pride, sometimes to a certain degree shame. And which are live and let live, more flexible or soft type of emotions, okay? Again, I'm really emphasizing more the pro-social kinds of emotions. And I emphasize this for everyone. The other ones, the hard ones, don't actually do the hard work of building the bridges. They can protect, they can defend, they can maybe perhaps be argued to prevent people from taking advantage of you. But what they cannot do, and what we really need to emphasize, is they cannot build constructive, conscious connections with other people. So that's really what I'm hoping you do with your own loved ones, with your relationships with family, with your professional development and frameworks. And if you're going on to graduate school, to really begin to study these things like awe, elevation, and these positive emotions, because they haven't gotten enough research. And they really are the key to developing a more peaceful, more healthier world. So that's my basic, encouragement to you. Go ahead and use these in your lives, study these things, and begin to take actions that allow you to really more fully understand and explore and develop the pro-social emotions in contrast to the more antisocial or at arm's length emotions. I think we're overtrained on those, and to see the links between the two in case, you become too entangled or too empathetic in the case as with codependence. So I hope this has been helpful, and we will talk again next week. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you next week. Bye.